Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. Edward Mitchell was driving through the busy streets of New York when something caught his attention. As he parked his car, a young girl holding a bottle of water calling out, "Ice-cold refreshing water, just $2. Who wants one?" She gestured and called out to pedestrians, like she was running the best business in town. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun. Her worn-out t-shirt and faded jeans showed that life wasn't easy for her, but what stood out the most was her confident posture. Before Edward could move on, a man stopped in front of her. "Give me a water." He grabbed a bottle and opened it without even looking at her. She handed it to him with the same enthusiasm as always. $2, ice-cold water straight from my cooler. The man took a big gulp, then frowned. $2? Are you kidding me? It cost half that at the store. Are you trying to rip me off? Edward noticed the fire in the girl's eyes. She didn't look intimidated at all. Rip you off? I walked up and down the street 3 times to buy this water. I carried a heavy cooler on my shoulder, stood in the sun, and kept shouting like crazy. If you want it cheaper, go buy it at the store. The man stepped forward. This is a ripoff. You're taking advantage of hard-working people. She stepped forward too, pointing at him firmly. Taking advantage? You already drank half of it. Don't want to pay? Spit the water back into the bottle and give it back to me. The man blinked. What? Spit it out. If you won't pay, return the water you drink. Go ahead. His eyes widened. This is ridiculous. He huffed. What's ridiculous is people who want everything for free. You didn't pay for it, so spit it back out. I want my water back. Pedestrians started laughing. Edward watched, intrigued. The man turned red, looked around, then angrily threw a crumpled bill on the table before stomping off. Edward couldn't take his eyes off her. She was different, and without realizing it, he started walking toward her. Amber was organizing the bottles in her cooler when she noticed a shadow in front of her. She looked up and saw a tall man dressed in a flawless suit. He seemed completely out of place on the hot sidewalk, like he had just walked out of a corporate office straight into this scene. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, his face had a serious expression, and his blue eyes had an analytical glint. She eyed him suspiciously. You thirsty? Edward didn't answer right away. How many bottles do you have? Amber narrowed her eyes. Why? I want to buy them all. She blinked, surprised. All of them? Why? Edward pulled out his wallet and tossed a $100 bill on the table. Let me know if you need change. Amber crossed her arms, trying to impress someone? Because if that's the case, don't bother. I already think you're weird enough. Edward raised an eyebrow. Let's just say, I appreciate a good investment. Oh, so water is an investment now? The market must have changed and I didn't get the memo. Edward held her gaze, as if analyzing every word she said. You negotiate well. You have personality. You didn't back down even when that guy tried to cheat you. Amber studied him for a moment, trying to figure out what his deal was. Right, but that still doesn't explain why a guy in a suit is dropping $100 in street water. He gave a slight smile, but didn't answer. Silently, he picked up the bottles and started carrying them to a luxury car parked nearby. Amber squinted. Wait, you're actually taking them all? That was the deal, wasn't it? Well, yeah, but this still seems really suspicious. Edward didn't flinch. Maybe I just want to help. If that's the case, save your money. I don't take handouts. He paused for a second and looked straight at her. It's not a handout. I pay for what something is worth, and your time is worth way more than $2 a bottle. Amber stayed silent for a moment. There was something odd about the way he spoke, like he carefully chose each word before saying it. Deep down she felt he wasn't lying, but she wasn't about to let that show. Well, if you want to waste your money, I won't stop you. She took the bill and stuffed it in her pocket, but her curiosity was already sparked. Edward placed the last bottles in the car, and before getting in, he looked at her one last time. See you around, vendor. Amber frowned. If you need more water, you know where to find me. Edward gave a small smile. It wasn't a smug smile. It was subtle, curious. He got into the car and drove off, but for the first time in a long while, his thoughts were stuck on someone, and he knew that wouldn't be the last time he crossed paths with Amber. Edward Mitchell was used to keeping his mind focused on business. Nothing distracted him, no meaningless conversations, no social events, no unnecessary interactions. But that morning, sitting in his luxurious office, at the top of a New York skyscraper, he realized his mind was somewhere else, or rather, on someone else, Amber Carter. the street girl who sold water with the determination of a businesswoman negotiating millions. He didn't understand why it still bothered him. It was just a simple purchase, he thought, nothing more than that. And yet the memory of her lingered, persistent. Edward tried to ignore it. He picked up the phone, reviewed reports, took an important call about a new contract. But between one task and another, his mind kept drifting back to that moment on the sidewalk, the way she stood up to that man without fear, the way she held on to every cent as if it were precious, the wary, sarcastic way she had responded to him. It was as if she were immune to his power, and that intrigued him. He looked out the window. The sky was clear, the sun was shining bright. Maybe she was still there. Edward grabbed his car keys and left the office, without explaining to anyone. Amber was exactly where he had imagined, standing on the same sidewalk, waving a water bottle, calling out to pedestrians with the same energy as the day before. Ice-cold water, $2. Edward parked at the corner and stepped out, blending into the crowd. He stood there, just watching. Amber sold as if it were the best job in the world. When someone approached, she smiled, joked, insisted. If they refused, she shrugged and moved on to the next person. She didn't get discouraged. And Edward realized something. Those $2 per bottle weren't just money to her. They were survival. That's what paid for her studies, her bills, her food. He felt something strange inside him, something unfamiliar. Then, without thinking too much, he walked toward her. Amber noticed him immediately. She stopped offering water and crossed her arms. Well, well, the eccentric millionaire is back. Edward raised an eyebrow. I have a name. That's great. So tell me, Edward, are you here to buy more water? He glanced at the cooler full of bottles and then back at her. Maybe. Amber narrowed her eyes. Maybe? So you're not here because of the heat, huh? Edward kept his expression unreadable. Let's just say I was curious. Curious about what? You. She let out a short, ironic laugh. Didn't know millionaires were interested in street vendors. You seem different. And you seem like a man who doesn't take no for an answer. Edward smirked slightly. Did I hit a nerve? Do you always just show up in people's lives like this? He shrugged. Only when something catches my attention. Amber studied him. Edward Mitchell was the kind of man who radiated confidence. His posture, his voice, his expression, everything about him commanded authority. But for some reason, he didn't intimidate her. She grabbed a bottle and shook it in front of him. So, Mr. Curious, are you buying or not? Edward took the bottle, but didn't pull it from her hand. His blue eyes locked onto hers. Do you think I'm eccentric for buying all your water yesterday? I do. Then what's stopping me from doing it again? Me. Edward raised an eyebrow. You? Amber pulled the bottle back. I don't want you to buy everything. I sell water to survive, not so some rich guy can throw money at me for no reason. Edward was silent for a few seconds. Then he took out his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. Keep the change. Amber took the bill, but her expression shifted. If you think you can buy me, you're wrong. Edward didn't say anything. He just took the bottle, opened it, and took a sip. Then, wiping his lips, he looked at her again. See you around, Seller. He turned and started walking back to his car, but Amber couldn't help herself. Wait. Edward stopped, but he didn't turn around. What is it? She clutched the bill in her hands. Why did you do that? He turned his head just enough for her to see his expression. Because I wanted to. Then, without another word, he got into his car and drove away. Amber stood there, looking at the money in her hand. She couldn't explain it, but something about that man unsettled her. And for the first time, she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to. The next day dawned, with a light breeze sweeping through the streets of New York. The heat wasn't as intense as the previous days, but the city was as busy as ever. Amber adjusted the cooler next to her makeshift table and prepared for another day of work. But deep down, something felt different, or rather, something in her mind, Edward Mitchell. She didn't know why, but ever since he left the day before, his words kept echoing in her head. Because I wanted to. That bothered her. She didn't like the idea of someone doing something for her without being asked. Amber never accepted anything for free. Never. That's why she decided to put the whole thing behind her. She would go about her day as usual, without thinking about him anymore. At least, that's what she thought. Edward Mitchell couldn't get her out of his head either. Sitting in his office, reviewing reports and dealing with meetings, he tried to ignore the nagging feeling that he wanted to see her again. It didn't make any sense. She was just a street vendor, An ordinary girl with no money, no status, nothing that connected her to his world. But somehow, he was drawn to the way she didn't bow down to anyone. Edward had never met anyone like her, and that's why, by late afternoon, he was back in his car, driving to the street corner, where he knew he would find her. Amber was busy organizing the cash in her register when she sensed someone approach. "Tell me that at least today, you came to buy water without any drama." She looked up and saw Edward standing in front of her. "And what if I didn't?" Amber sighed, crossing her arms. "In that case, you'll have to pay an entrance fee for the show." He smiled slightly. "I'm not here to buy all your bottles again, if that's what you're worried about." "Great. My business is selling to regular customers, not eccentric millionaires." Edward ignored her sarcastic tone and slipped his hands into his suit pockets. "Since we're talking business, why don't we discuss it over dinner?" Amber blinked, confused. "What? Me? Dinner? Are you asking me out?" "Considering that I just want to talk, I wouldn't exactly call it a date." She let out a surprised laugh. "Oh sure, because millionaires always invite street vendors to casual dinners, right?" Edward tilted his head. "Why does that surprise you?" "Because it doesn't make sense." He raised an eyebrow. "What doesn't make sense?" "You, a guy in an expensive suit who probably eats at restaurants where an appetizer costs more than my rent, inviting me to dinner." Edward shrugged. "So what?" Amber crossed her arms. "So that doesn't happen. Then tell me," he took a step forward, "what exactly is stopping you from saying yes?" She stared at him. He looked completely serious. There was no sarcasm, no jokes, nothing to suggest he was messing with her, but that didn't mean Amber believed him. "I'm not a game, Edward," he frowned. "Who said you were? You want to test me, see how far my patience goes, or try to impress me with your money. But I'm not falling for that." Edward sighed. "Do you always make so many assumptions about people?" "Only when mysterious millionaires show up out of nowhere wanting to talk. And what if I told you I just want to know more about you?" Amber laughed. "I'd say you're lying." Edward watched her for a few seconds before shaking his head. "All right." Rejected. He grabbed a bottle of water, placed a $20 bill on the table, and walked away. Amber followed him with her eyes, unsure of what to feel. She expected him to insist, to try to convince her, but he didn't, and strangely, that bothered her. Edward got into his car and shut the door, but he didn't start the engine right away. He could still hear the frustration in her voice, and for the first time, he felt like he wasn't in control of the situation. Amber was different from any woman he had ever met. She didn't want anything from him, and maybe for that exact reason, he wanted more of her. Edward knew this wouldn't be their last encounter, and Amber knew it too. She just wasn't ready to admit it. The next morning was cloudy, but Amber's mood was even darker. She tried to go about her routine as usual, but the truth was, her conversation with Edward kept replaying in her head. She thought that, after rejecting his dinner invitation, he would insist or try to impress her somehow, but he simply accepted her answer and left. And that didn't make sense. Men like Edward don't take no that easily. And maybe what bothered her most was the fact that she was hoping he'd come back. She didn't like that feeling. She didn't want to expect anything from anyone, so she decided to focus on what really mattered, her job and her college. But that day, a surprise was waiting for her. Amber was in line at the university's administration office, patiently waiting to settle an issue with her tuition fees. She had already missed a few payments and knew she needed to negotiate, or she wouldn't be able to continue her studies. When it was finally her turn, the attendant looked at the computer screen and then at her. "Ah, there's no debt in your name." Amber furrowed her brow. "What? Your debt has been cleared. You're all set with the university." She felt her stomach churn. This must be a mistake. The attendant smiled. "No, it's not. The system has confirmed the payment. Who paid it?" It was done anonymously. Amber felt dizzy. She didn't even need to think hard to know who had done that. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to control the growing frustration. Edward. She wasted no time. As soon as she left the university, she took a bus straight to Mitchell Enterprises, Edward's company building. She didn't care if he was busy. He had crossed the line. When she got to the building, the receptionist tried to stop her. "Do you have an appointment?" Amber forced a smile. "He's expecting me." The receptionist looked at her suspiciously. "What's your name?" "Amber Carter." The woman typed something into the computer and, not finding her name on the schedule, forced a polite smile. "Sorry, but he can't see anyone without an appointment." "Well then, I'll wait." The receptionist frowned. "Miss, he might be busy for hours." "I have time." Amber sat down on one of the chairs in the lobby. People passed by, wearing expensive clothes, talking on the phone, looking rushed and busy. She didn't fit in there, but that didn't bother her. Nothing would make her leave without talking to Edward. It didn't take long for Edward to find out she was there. When one of his assistants informed him that Amber was in the reception, he raised an eyebrow, surprised. "And what did she say?" "She said she'll wait." He smiled slightly. Of course she would wait. Without saying anything, Edward got up and walked down to the lobby. When he arrived, he found her sitting, arms crossed, and a clearly impatient expression on her face. She noticed him as soon as he appeared. She immediately stood up and walked toward him. "We need to talk, now." Edward stayed calm. "If you needed to see me so badly, you should have accepted the dinner invitation. Don't play games with me, Mitchell." Edward gave a small smile. "Then let's go to my office." Amber followed him, her eyes burning with anger. As soon as they entered his office, she slammed the door and turned to face him. "You paid my tuition." Edward calmly sat in his chair. "So?" She clenched her jaw. "I didn't ask you for anything." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" He tilted his head. "Because I wanted to." Amber felt a lump in her throat. He said the exact same words he said when he bought her water. "This isn't right." Edward sighed. "What's not right?" "The fact that you can continue studying without worrying about overdue bills?" She clenched her fists. "I would have figured it out." "Yeah, and you would have worked 3 times harder, exhausted yourself, and still risked losing your spot. That's not your problem." Edward stood up. "You're right, but it's not your problem anymore either." Amber was left speechless. She wanted to argue, yell, make him understand that she didn't need his help, but deep down, she knew she did. She took a deep breath. "This doesn't change anything. I'm not expecting it to." She stared at him. He seemed sincere, and that made her even more frustrated. Amber shook her head. "Don't think you can buy me." Edward smiled. "If I wanted to buy you, I would have offered more money." Amber narrowed her eyes. "You're unbearable." Edward took a step forward, standing only a few inches away from her. "And you're impossible." "But I like that." She felt her heart race but didn't show it. Then she turned and opened the door. "This doesn't mean anything, Mitchell." Edward simply smiled as she walked out. He knew it meant more than she was willing to admit. Amber left Mitchell Enterprises with quick, determined steps. Her heart was racing, and her mind was in turmoil. Edward Mitchell was unbearable. He seemed to have a special talent for making her mad, crossing her boundaries effortlessly, and worse, doing it with a calm, provocative look. She didn't know what was worse, the fact that he paid her tuition without asking for permission, or the fact that deep down, she felt relief about it. But that didn't change anything. It didn't change who she was. It didn't change the fact that she didn't want to owe him anything. Amber took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The dark clouds signaled that a storm was coming. Great, as if my day wasn't bad enough already. She quickened her pace, unaware that at that very moment, Edward was thinking about her too. Back in his office, Edward sat in his chair and gazed at the city through the massive glass wall. He knew Amber would be furious when she found out he had paid off her debt. But even so, he couldn't stop himself. He couldn't explain why he cared so much about her. Maybe it was because she was different from everyone he knew. She didn't want anything from him, and maybe for that very reason, he wanted to be near her. Edward picked up the phone and dialed a number. Find out more about Amber Carter's routine. Where she works, where she lives, but nothing invasive. I just want to make sure she's okay. He hung up before his assistant could ask any questions. He didn't have the answers himself, but he knew he couldn't just let her go. The next day, Amber was back at her usual spot. Even after her argument with Edward, her routine hadn't changed. She still needed to work, still needed to make money to cover her expenses. But to her surprise, Edward showed up again. He approached with his hands in his pockets, wearing that same calm expression. Amber sighed before he could say a word. "You just don't give up, do you?" Edward gave a slight smile. "I think I'm starting to like that bad mood of yours. And I'm starting to not stand that superior attitude of yours." He ignored the comment and grabbed a bottle of water. "How much?" Amber crossed her arms. $2. And this time, no tip. Edward handed her the money but didn't walk away. Amber eyed him with suspicion. "What else do you want?" He opened the bottle and took a sip. "Just wanted to see if you still hate me. And are you satisfied with the answer?" Edward smiled. "Not yet, but I'm enjoying the process." She rolled her eyes. "You're a problem. And you're stubborn. And you're arrogant. And you're irritating." Amber paused for a second and realized they were arguing like two kids. She sighed. "Fine, you win." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Is that a surrender?" "That's a leave, before I throw this water on you." Edward laughed. "See you tomorrow, Seller." He walked away, and Amber watched him go, trying to understand why she felt a strange warmth in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that man wouldn't be leaving her life anytime soon. The day dragged on slower than usual for Amber. After the brief but intense interaction with Edward, she found herself distracted while selling water. She hated to admit it, but his presence affected her not in a conventional way, like an obvious romantic interest. It was more like a constant challenge. He tested her patience, he tested her pride, and in some irritating way, she couldn't simply ignore him. But there was one important detail. Edward Mitchell didn't seem like the type to give up easily, and Amber was about to confirm that in the worst possible way. That evening, a storm began to form over New York. Amber had planned to sell water until late, but as soon as the first raindrop started to fall, the pedestrian traffic slowed down. She sighed, packing up the bottles in her cooler and getting ready to leave. But before she could even close her cooler, a black car pulled up in front of her. The window rolled down slowly, revealing Edward Mitchell in the driver's seat. He studied her for a moment before speaking in a casual tone. "Looks like you're about to get soaked." Amber crossed her arms. "I can manage." "Yeah, I know you're the definition of pride and independence. But just for today, how about accepting a ride?" She hesitated. Accepting a favor from him wasn't part of her plan, but the rain was getting heavier, and she didn't want to walk home soaking wet. With a sigh, she grabbed her cooler and opened the car door. "If you try to convince me again that you're not an eccentric millionaire, I'll get out halfway." Edward smiled, but didn't reply. The ride was quiet for a few minutes. Edward's car was impeccable. The smell of new leather and cleanliness made it unlike any car Amber had ever been in. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Edward drove with a neutral expression, his eyes fixed on the road, as if perfectly comfortable with the silence. But Amber wasn't. "Why do you do this?" Edward didn't take his eyes off the road. "Do what?" "Show up out of nowhere, buy water you don't need, pay off a debt that isn't yours." Edward let out a small sigh. "Maybe I like helping," Amber scoffed. "Millionaires don't help people like me for no reason." Edward turned to her for a brief moment before focusing back on the road. "And who said I'm just an ordinary millionaire?" Amber didn't reply. She didn't want to admit that he really was different. The car moved along the wet streets when suddenly the engine sputtered and stopped. Edward frowned and tried to start it again. Nothing. "Great," he muttered, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. Amber held back a laugh. "What happened? Your luxury car let you down?" Edward exhaled, clearly out of patience. "Apparently." Amber looked around. "There's a taxi stand just around the corner." Edward opened the door and looked out at the heavy rain. "I'm not running through the rain to catch a taxi." Amber laughed. "Oh, right. I forgot the great Edward Mitchell can't get wet." He looked at her, challenging. "If you want to run over there, be my guest." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "So what now? Are we camping out in the car until someone rescues us?" Edward pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm calling a driver. It'll take a while." Amber glanced around and noticed a hot dog stand under a nearby awning. She smiled. "I know exactly how we can pass the time." A few minutes later, Amber and Edward were sitting on a makeshift bench by the hot dog stand. The vendor watched them with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Edward held a hot dog as if he'd never seen one before. Amber, on the other hand, ate hers without hesitation. "You've never had one before, Mitchell?" Edward looked at the food, then at her. "Not exactly my kind of meal." "Of course, your diet must be all caviar and lobster." He took a bite and made a slight face. Amber laughed. "See? Real food. No fancy plates or complicated names." Edward chewed slowly and glanced at her from the side. "You enjoy teasing me, don't you?" She smiled a little. Edward shook his head, but for the first time, he didn't seem like a distant, cold CEO. He seemed just like a regular guy. And suddenly, Amber caught herself looking at him for too long. She quickly looked away and took another bite of her hot dog. "What?" Edward asked. "Nothing." He smiled. "You were studying me. I was not." Edward tilted his head. "You were." She sighed, frustrated. "Fine. I was just trying to figure out what you want." Edward was silent for a moment, and then, for the first time, he was completely honest. "I'm trying to figure that out too." Amber blinked. "What?" Edward held her gaze. "I'm trying to understand what I want too." Amber hadn't expected that answer. She opened her mouth to say something but was interrupted by Edward's phone ringing. He quickly answered, "Yes." "Okay, I'm on my way." He hung up and looked at her. "Our car is here." Amber nodded and finished her food. As they got back into the car, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't the same as before. And as Edward drove her home, Amber realized something. For the first time, he didn't feel like a stranger, and for the first time, she didn't want him to leave. The next morning was clear, with no sign of the storm from the night before. But inside Amber, the storm was still there. Ever since she got into Edward's car, ever since she saw a different side of him, something had been shifting. She hated to admit it, but she was starting to get used to having him around, his sarcastic remarks, his stubbornness, his way of showing up unexpectedly and challenging everything she said. That was dangerous. Amber had always been independent. She always knew that no one would help her except herself. So why did Edward Mitchell feel so different from everyone she had ever met? She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. She couldn't afford to be distracted. It was just a passing moment. Soon he would get bored of whatever game this was and disappear. At least that's what she thought. That same day, Edward was at Mitchell Enterprises, sitting behind his glass desk, reviewing contracts, when a familiar voice filled his office. "Edward, darling, you won't believe what just happened." He looked up to see Stella Stanford, one of New York's most well-known socialites, walking in as if she owned the place. Stella was beautiful, tall, blonde, always surrounded by luxury, a woman used to getting everything she wanted, including Edward's attention. But he never wanted her. She was persistent, of course, and for some reason, she had decided that they would make the perfect couple. Edward had never encouraged her, but Stella wasn't the type to take no for an answer. "Stella, I'm busy." She ignored him and dropped onto the chair in front of his desk. "Oh, you always are. But anyway, I came to invite you to dinner tonight. It's been ages since we went out." Edward sighed, already impatient. "Because I've never agreed to it. That's just a detail. One day you will." He rolled his eyes and turned his attention back to the computer. "I'm not going." Stella sighed. "Then why are people saying you've been seen around with a street vendor?" Edward stopped typing. He slowly lifted his gaze. "Who said that?" Stella shrugged. "Oh, I don't know. Rumors, I guess. You know how much New York loves gossip, but tell me, is it true?" Edward leaned back in his chair. "And if it is, what's the problem?" Her eyes widened. "You have to be kidding." Edward Mitchell, one of the most powerful men in the city, walking around with a girl who has no status, no name, nothing. He didn't like her tone. Edward had never been the kind of person who cared about what others said, but the way Stella spoke about Amber bothered him deeply. He leaned forward, his gaze turning cold. "Watch what you say." Stella laughed, but shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Wow, so the rumors are true. You really are interested in her." Edward neither confirmed nor denied it. He just stared at Stella until she lost her patience and left. But the problem was, Stella wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat easily, and that was going to be a bigger problem than he had imagined. Later that day, Amber was still at the university when she noticed the whispers around her. Students looked at her with curiosity, some with amusement. She didn't understand why until she overheard part of a conversation. "I can't believe he's hanging out with her. Did you see Stella? She's furious. He must be messing with her. What else would a guy like Edward Mitchell want with a girl like that?" Amber felt her face burn. So that was it. Edward wasn't the only one who attracted attention. The entire city was talking about them. And the reason had a name: Stella Stanford. Amber didn't know exactly what Stella had said, but she knew she was involved, and she wasn't going to let it slide. By late afternoon, Amber went to Mitchell Enterprises once again. She entered the building, and this time, she didn't wait for permission. She marched up to Edward's office and pushed the door open without knocking. He looked up, surprised. "Amber." She closed the door behind her and crossed her arms. "I need to know something." Edward sighed, already sensing this wouldn't be an easy conversation. "What now? Why is everyone in your company talking about me?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Edward. Your little friend Stella decided to spread gossip." Edward felt his blood boil. So that was it. He should have known Stella would pull something like this, Amber continued, her patience wearing thin. I told you I didn't want to be part of your world, but you keep dragging me into it. I didn't drag you into anything. Yes, you did. Now people are looking at me like I'm some kind of toy, like I'm a joke. Edward stood up, his voice firm. Do you care what they think? She clenched her jaw. Of course I care. This is my life, Edward, and I don't want to be the center of a game I never chose to play. He took a deep breath. I never meant to hurt you, but you did. They stared at each other, tension thick in the air. Amber wanted to scream, to walk away and never see him again, but deep down, part of her wanted him to ask her to stay. But he didn't. Edward knew there was no point in insisting. Amber wasn't ready to understand what was between them. He sighed. If you want to go, then go. Amber felt a tightness in her chest. She'd expected him to convince her otherwise, but he did nothing to stop her. So without another word, she walked out of his office and slammed the door. Edward stood there, staring at the floor. For the first time in years, he felt like he was losing something important, but he had no idea how to fix it. That night, Amber couldn't sleep. She should have felt relieved for putting an end to that mess, but all she felt was an emptiness that didn't make sense. And Edward, on the other side of the city, wondered if she would ever forgive him. The morning arrived gray and damp, perfectly matching how Amber felt inside. She woke up with the same suffocating feeling that had followed her all night. Her encounter with Edward the day before wouldn't leave her mind. She should have felt relieved for finally putting an end to that mess. She should have been happy for pushing away a meddling millionaire who kept showing up in her life uninvited. But instead, she felt an inexplicable void. She didn't want to admit it, but she missed him, and that thought irritated her even more. She couldn't afford to miss anyone. Amber got out of bed and tried to focus on what really mattered: work, studies, and survival. Far from there, Edward Mitchell wasn't having a peaceful night either. He wasn't the kind of man to dwell on decisions. He had always been practical, moving forward without looking back. But for the first time in years, he found himself thinking about something, or rather someone, Amber Carter. She was stubborn, temperamental, irritating, but she was also genuine, strong, and absolutely one of a kind. And even though he had let her walk away, he couldn't just ignore what he was feeling. That's why that morning, he made a decision. If Amber didn't want his direct help, then he would find another way to help her. Amber's routine became even harder without Edward around. In the past few days, she noticed she had less time to study. Besides selling water on the streets, she now had to take on more shifts at the restaurant where she worked at night. Her boss, a rude and impatient man, didn't like her. If you want to keep this job, stop showing up late. Amber took a deep breath, pushing down her exhaustion. I wasn't late. Yes, you were. If you don't want to follow the rules, you can leave. She knew she couldn't argue. She needed that job, so she swallowed the response she wanted to give and went back to the kitchen. What Amber didn't know was that Edward had been keeping an eye on her from afar. After she walked out of his life, he had asked one of his assistants to discreetly monitor her situation. He didn't want to invade her privacy. He just wanted to make sure she was okay. And from what he had learned, she wasn't. Her boss treated her badly. The bills were piling up. And still, she refused to ask for help. Edward Mitchell wasn't the kind of man to sit back when something bothered him. So without Amber knowing, he started taking action. In the days that followed, strange things started happening in Amber's life. First, her restaurant boss was fired. No one explained why, but suddenly, a new manager was hired. He was much more polite and even seemed to like Amber. If you ever need to leave early for your studies, just let me know. Amber was surprised. Her old boss had never been that understanding, but she decided not to question her luck. Then something else strange happened. The pipes in the tiny apartment she shared with her mother suddenly stopped leaking. The pipe had been broken for weeks, but overnight it was fixed. What happened? Amber asked her mother. No idea, her mother replied. All I know is that this morning everything was working fine. Amber frowned, but the biggest shock was still to come. One morning, Amber went to the university to check her overdue tuition balance. She knew she would have to deal with it sooner or later, but when she got to the office, she was told her tuition was paid off until the end of the semester. Amber felt a chill down her spine. That must be a mistake. The woman at the desk shook her head. No, everything is correct. Someone paid it for you. Amber didn't need much to figure out who had done it. Edward. She stormed out of the university, furious. It didn't matter that he had helped. The problem was that he had done it without asking. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Amber," she gritted her teeth. "Don't play innocent. You know why I'm calling." On the other end, Edward Mitchell kept his voice calm. "If this is a thank you call, you're welcome," she scoffed. "This is not a thank you," I figured. Amber stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and closed her eyes. "Why do you keep doing this?" "Because I can." She opened her eyes. "That's not a real answer," Edward sighed. "Amber, you might hate that I helped, but you can't deny that your life is a little easier now." She stayed silent because deep down, she knew he was right, but that didn't mean she liked it. "I never asked for any of this, and I never asked for permission to do what I think is right." Amber felt her anger rising. "You're impossible, and you're stubborn." She bit her lip. Edward wasn't going to change, and for some reason, part of her didn't want him to. But that didn't mean she was going to accept what he had done without a fight. Amber knew this game between them was far from over, and for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted it to end. The days went by more smoothly for Amber. At least in theory, the changes Edward had made in her life had a huge impact. With fewer worries, she was finally able to focus on her studies. But that didn't mean she was happy about the situation. She still felt a weight on her chest every time she thought about what Edward had done. Because deep down, the problem wasn't what he had done. It was the fact that after everything, she was still thinking about him. Edward, on the other hand, kept watching everything from a distance. He knew Amber would never accept his help if she found out, but that didn't stop him. He tried to convince himself that it didn't mean anything, but the more time passed, the more he missed her. And that longing was exactly what brought him to the university fundraiser that night. He knew Amber would be there, and more than that, he knew it was time to see her again. Amber was at the event, helping the professors organize the donors, when she heard a murmur ripple through the room. She looked around, and the moment she saw who had just arrived, her body froze. Edward Mitchell. He walked in with the same confident posture as always, his suit impeccable, his gaze serious. Everything about him exuded power, and yet he looked nothing like the man who had shared hot dogs with her in the storm. Amber felt a knot in her throat, but before she could turn away and escape, Edward's eyes found hers, and in that moment, she knew running wasn't an option. He walked toward her, his steps firm, determined. Amber crossed her arms, trying to appear indifferent. "I guess the city's millionaires finally decided to do something useful, huh?" Edward gave a small smile. "Let's just say, certain events interest me more than others." "Or certain people?" He raised an eyebrow. "Maybe." Amber sighed. "Why are you here, Edward?" He was silent for a moment, before finally answering. "Because I needed to see you." She swallowed hard. She wasn't expecting such a direct response. "For what? Another round of your millionaire hero complex?" Edward shook his head. "To tell you the truth." Amber let out a dry laugh. "Oh, now you want to be honest? After secretly helping me? After making decisions about my life without asking me?" He took a deep breath. "I never did anything to offend you, Amber. I just wanted," he hesitated. "What?" She crossed her arms. "What did you want?" Edward looked into her eyes. "I just wanted to do something for you, because I care." Amber felt her breath hitch for a moment. Caring doesn't mean taking control of my life. And refusing help doesn't mean being strong. She had no response to that. And then he said the last thing she ever expected. "I fell in love with you, Amber." Her heart stopped for a second. She blinked, trying to process those words. "What?" Edward held her gaze. "I fell in love since the first time I saw you selling water on the street, facing the world with that defiant smile. Since I realized you didn't want anything from me, that you never bowed to anyone." Amber didn't know what to say. It was as if everything around them had disappeared. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." She felt her heart race, but at the same time she felt afraid, because admitting she had feelings for him meant accepting that her life would never be the same. And right now, she didn't know if she was ready for that. Edward waited for an answer, but Amber remained silent. He didn't want to pressure her, but he needed to know if there was still a chance. "Amber?" She looked at him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. "I need time," Edward nodded slowly. "I understand." But he wasn't going to walk away, not this time, because now he knew she felt the same. She just needed to accept it. And when she was ready, he would be waiting. Edward's confession echoed in Amber's mind like thunder in a clear sky. "I fell in love with you, Amber." She didn't know what to say at the time. didn't know how to react. But now, as she walked through the streets of New York, all she could think was, what now? Amber never imagined that someone like Edward Mitchell, the untouchable CEO, could fall in love with someone like her. And the worst part? She knew she had feelings for him too. But admitting that meant accepting her life would change forever. And that was the scary part. Days passed, and Edward kept his distance, not because he had given up on her, but because he knew he had to give her time to think. He had already said how he felt. Now it was up to her to decide if she wanted him in her life. But Edward Mitchell was not a patient man, and when the longing became unbearable, he knew he had to see her again. Amber was at her usual spot, selling water, when she heard familiar footsteps approaching. She didn't need to look to know who it was, but she looked anyway. Edward was there, hands in his pockets, a serious expression, his eyes fixed on her. Amber held her breath. He didn't say anything right away. He just picked up a bottle of water from the crate and handed her the money. But when Amber reached out to take the bills, he held her fingers for just a moment longer than necessary. "Have you made a decision?" he asked softly. Amber felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't need to ask what he was talking about, because she already knew. And the truth was, she had already made a decision. She just didn't know how to say it out loud. So instead, she took the money, placed it in the box, and crossed her arms. "How about dinner?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me out?" She shrugged. "Let's call it an experiment. I want to see if you can get through a normal meal without complaining." He smiled. "I think I can try." That night, they met at a small restaurant, far from luxury and exclusive reservations. Edward, dressed in a suit and looking impeccable, stood out there, but Amber didn't care because, for the first time, she decided she wanted to be there. So, Edward started after taking a sip of his drink. "Does this mean I can already call you my girlfriend?" Amber smiled. "Are you always this straightforward? Life is short. I prefer to get to the point." She played with the napkin on the table. "I think we can call this a test." Edward raised an eyebrow. "A test? Yes. I want to see if you can handle my routine, my habits, my temperament." He gave a half smile. "Amber, if I've made it this far, I think I'll pass the test with flying colors." She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. The days that followed were unlike anything Amber had ever experienced. Edward wasn't a typical boyfriend. He wasn't clingy or over the top, but he was always there in the little things. In the way he always stopped by her stand just to buy a bottle of water, in the way he held her hand even without saying a word, in the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. And for the first time, Amber allowed herself to enjoy it. But she was still afraid, because Edward Mitchell was a completely different world from hers, and she knew that at some point, that world would try to pull them apart. Edward noticed her hesitation. Even when she smiled, even when she kissed him, there was always a part of her holding something back. She wasn't completely his, and he knew he had to change that. So he made a decision. The next night, he took Amber to a special place, the same place where he had first seen her, the same corner where she sold water, calling out and smiling at customers. There, with the city lights shining behind them, he took her hand. Amber frowned. "What are you doing?" Edward took a deep breath and knelt before her. Amber felt her heart stop. "Edward." He looked straight into her eyes. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were different. I knew my life would never be the same." She felt her eyes burn. "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple but incredibly beautiful ring. "I've never met anyone like you, Amber, and I never will. You've shown me that there are things money can't buy. You've taught me that pride matters, but love matters even more." She bit her lip, trying to hold back her tears. Edward held her hand firmly. "So today, I want to ask you." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Amber felt her legs tremble. She had never imagined that someone like Edward Mitchell would propose to someone like her. But looking into his eyes, she knew it was real, and deep down, she had known the answer all along. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yes." Edward smiled like never before. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and before he could say another word, Amber pulled him into a deep kiss. Around them, the city remained the same, but for them, everything had changed. The days after the proposal were a whirlwind for Amber. She had said yes, she had agreed to marry Edward Mitchell, but the closer she got to this new reality, the more fear grew inside her. Edward was a man from another world, and despite the love she felt for him, she couldn't ignore the fact that his world was dangerous for her. Edward was happier than ever. From the moment Amber accepted his proposal, he felt different, as if for the first time in his life, he truly had something that money couldn't buy. But at the same time, he sensed that something was bothering Amber. She didn't say anything, but he could see it in her eyes. Something was worrying her, and he feared that worry had to do with them. The crisis started subtly. Amber began avoiding conversations about the wedding. Whenever Edward brought it up, she changed the subject. He noticed, but didn't push. But as time went on, she seemed to drift further away, until one day, everything exploded. Amber was at work when she heard something that made her blood boil. "Did you hear?" One of the employees was whispering to another. "CEO Mitchell bought this restaurant." "What?" "Yeah, he bought it recently, but everything was kept low-key. He must have his reasons." Amber felt her heart race. It couldn't be true, but deep down she knew it was. Edward had bought the restaurant where she worked, and that could only mean one thing. He was trying to control her life. Amber wasted no time. She left the restaurant and went straight to Mitchell Enterprises, furious. She walked in without asking for permission and marched straight to Edward's office. He looked surprised to see her. "Amber, what's going on?" She closed the door and crossed her arms. "Did you buy the restaurant where I work?" Edward was silent for a moment, taking in the situation. Then he sighed. "Yes." Amber felt her stomach turn. "Why?" He stood up and put his hands in his pockets. "Because I wanted to make sure you were safe. I wanted to make sure no one treated you badly." She laughed without humor. "So instead of trusting that I can stand up for myself, you decided to buy me a job?" "That's not how I thought about it, but that's exactly what you did, Edward. You're trying to turn me into something I'm not." He frowned. "That's not true. Then why are you always trying to solve my problems for me?" Edward took a deep breath. "Because I love you, Amber. And when you love someone, you want to protect them." She felt her heart tighten, but instead of calming her, those words only fueled her frustration. She shook her head. "That's not love, Edward. That's control." Edward felt a chill in his chest. "Do you really believe that?" She was silent for a moment. Then, with a choked voice, she said the words Edward least wanted to hear. "I can't marry you." Edward felt like the world stopped. He didn't blink, didn't react, because in that moment, everything inside him collapsed. "What?" Amber swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I need time. I need to figure out if marriage is really what I want." He took a deep breath. "So you're breaking up with me?" She looked away. "I don't know." Edward felt a lump in his throat. He had never felt so helpless, but he wouldn't beg her to stay, because if there was one thing he had learned from Amber, it was that love had to be a choice. So despite the overwhelming pain he felt, he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, I respect your decision." Amber felt her chest tighten even more. She had expected him to try to change her mind, but he didn't, and that hurt even more. So without saying another word, she turned her back and left. And for the first time since meeting Edward, she felt truly alone. Edward, on the other hand, stood there frozen, feeling like the love of his life was walking away. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end, because when something is real, destiny always finds a way to bring it back together. And he could only hope that this time, Amber would realize that before it was too late. The days after the breakup were pure torment for Amber. She had made her decision out of fear, pride, and a belief that she needed to be independent. But the truth? She missed Edward more than she was willing to admit. Life moved on. She worked, studied, paid bills, but even with everything more stable, a void followed her with every step. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, she knew exactly what was missing: Edward Mitchell. Edward wasn't doing well either. He had never dealt with the kind of pain he was feeling now. In business, he always knew how to turn a crisis around, but how could he fix something that didn't just depend on him? However, Edward Mitchell was never the type to accept defeat. If there was one thing he had learned in life, it was that valuable things deserve to be fought for. And Amber was the most valuable thing he had ever had. So that morning, he made his final decision. If Amber wanted proof that he wouldn't try to control her, he would give her the biggest proof of all. The day started like any other for Amber. She packed her cooler, filled it with water, and went to her selling spot. But when she got there, she saw something that made her freeze. Edward Mitchell was there, and to her surprise, he was selling water in the middle of the sidewalk. with a cooler just like hers. Edward held a water bottle in his hand and yelled, "Cold water, $2. Perfect for this heat." Amber was speechless. People watched, some laughed, others murmured in surprise. After all, billionaire CEO Edward Mitchell was selling water on the street, and he didn't seem to care one bit. She walked up to him, incredulous. "Edward, what are you doing?" He turned to her with a small smile. "Selling water." She crossed her arms. "Very funny. Now tell me the truth." Edward handed a bottle to a customer, took the money, and put it in his pocket. Then he looked at her. "I'm proving to you that I can live in your world." Amber raised an eyebrow. "Have you lost your mind?" Edward took a step closer. "You were always afraid I'd try to change you, but I never wanted that. I love you exactly as you are." Her chest tightened. "Edward," he went on, "if I can live in your world, maybe you can live in mine." Amber held her breath, because at that moment, she realized what he was really saying. Hours passed, and for the first time, Amber and Edward sold water together. He learned how to call customers over, handle change, and endure the heat from the pavement. And with every passing moment, Amber saw more of the man who had won her heart, not the powerful CEO, not the billionaire surrounded by luxury, but the Edward who was doing all this for her, the Edward who just wanted to prove his love. And for the first time, she realized there was no reason to resist anymore. By the end of the day, Amber couldn't hold back any longer. She looked at him, his face sweaty, his hair a mess, his expensive suit completely ruined, and she knew she didn't want to fight this anymore. So without thinking too much, she cupped his face and kissed him. It was a kiss filled with emotion, relief, and unspoken love. Edward held her tightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment since the day he met her. And when they pulled apart, he smiled. "So, does this mean I passed the test?" Amber chuckled softly. "It means I don't want to run anymore." Edward pulled her closer. "Then don't ever run from me again." She nodded. "Never again." And in that moment, they both knew they were in this forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Amber had ever experienced. Now there were no more doubts, no more fears, no more walls. She loved Edward, and for the first time, she allowed herself to embrace that love completely. But that didn't mean things would be easy, because even though she had let Edward into her life, the challenges were far from over. The first big change came when Amber received a letter from the university. She had been accepted for a full scholarship. When she saw the letter in her hands, her eyes filled with tears, because she knew what this meant. After so much effort, after so many struggles, she could finally study without worrying about money. And deep down, she knew Edward had helped make this possible. But this time, she didn't feel angry, because now she understood. He wasn't trying to control her. He just wanted to see her dreams come true. Edward was thrilled with the news. But at the same time, he knew Amber wouldn't accept any kind of special treatment. So he decided to celebrate in a different way. He arranged a small dinner at a restaurant. She liked nothing extravagant, just the two of them, a quiet meal and a night to celebrate. When they arrived, Amber looked at him, suspicious. "You planned all this?" Edward smiled. "I thought you deserved a celebration." She smiled back. "I don't need parties, Edward. I just need you." And for the first time, Edward Mitchell felt like he had finally found home. But not everything would be that simple. Edward's past was still an obstacle for them, and sooner or later, he knew they would have to face it. The problem came in the form of a corporate charity event Edward had to attend, and he wanted Amber to go with him. But she hesitated. "Are you sure you want to take me?" He took her hand. "I don't want to take you, Amber. I need to, because you're part of my life now," she sighed. "Then let's go." And at that moment, she knew she was ready to face anything by his side. The night of the event arrived, and for the first time in a long time, Amber felt nervous. Not because she was in a luxurious setting, but because she knew these people would judge her. And she was right. The stares, the whispers, everything made it clear she wasn't welcome. But when she looked at Edward and saw his steady gaze, she knew none of that mattered. He didn't care what they thought, and neither should she. But still, the inevitable happened. Stella Stanford, the woman who had once chased after Edward, didn't waste any time coming over. "So it's true, you're really with her." Amber stood her ground. "Yes, is there a problem?" Stella smiled, a fake, calculated smile. "None. I just thought it was curious." Amber crossed her arms. "Curious? Why?" "Because a man like Edward has always had the best." Edward interrupted before Amber could respond. And now I have the best." Stella lost color in her face. Amber took Edward's hand, and for the first time, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, because the love she shared with Edward was proof enough. When they left the event, Amber stopped for a moment and looked at Edward. "Are you sure you want to be with me?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "You still doubt it?" She shrugged. "I don't doubt. I just want to hear you say it." He smiled. "Amber Carter, I want you by my side forever, and nothing in this world is going to make me change my mind." And in that moment, Amber knew she didn't have to be afraid anymore, because with him, she had finally found her place. The days after the event were the calmest Amber had ever lived, not because life had gotten easier, but because she finally felt safe by Edward's side. Now there was no more fear, no insecurity, no barriers. Their love had withstood everything, and Amber was ready to take the next step. Edward also knew it was the right time. He had wanted to propose to Amber from the moment he realized he couldn't live without her. But now, he finally knew how to do it. He didn't want luxury. He didn't want anything grand. He wanted something simple, true, the way she liked it. So that morning, he prepared the biggest surprise of Amber's life. Amber woke up to a message on her phone. "Edward, meet me at the place where it all started." She frowned. The place where it all started? Then suddenly, she realized. He wanted her to go to her old selling spot, and her heart skipped a beat. When she arrived at the location, she stopped, surprised. The place was decorated in a special way. There were small lights hanging, flower petals scattered on the ground, and a cooler in the middle. And beside it, Edward was standing, smiling. Amber slowly approached. "Edward, what is all this?" He took a bottle of water from the cooler and handed it to her. "I had to make sure you accepted this last bottle." Amber smiled, but before she could say anything, he knelt down and her world stopped. Edward opened a small box, revealing a simple, yet incredibly beautiful ring. Then, with a serious and emotional look, he said the words Amber would never forget. "Amber Carter, from the day I first saw you selling water on the street with that defiant smile, I knew my life would never be the same." She felt her eyes burn. "You taught me that love can't be bought, that pride doesn't mean pushing away those who love us, and that happiness is in the little things." She bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. "And now I want to know, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Amber felt her chest explode, and without hesitation she said the only thing she could, "Yes." Edward smiled, put the ring on her finger, and before they could say anything else, Amber pulled him into a deep kiss. The world around them disappeared. Now, nothing else mattered. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The wedding took place a month later. Amber didn't want a luxurious event, and Edward wanted it to be exactly the way she wanted. It was a small, simple ceremony, but full of love. She wore a delicate and elegant dress, no exaggerations. He never let go of her hand for a second. And when the judge finally announced they were husband and wife, Edward held her face and whispered, "I love you, my wife." Amber smiled, "I love you more." And that night, as they danced under the city lights, Amber knew she had found her home not in a luxurious house, not in wealth, but in Edward Mitchell's arms. And for the first time in her life, she was sure that this was just the beginning.